Hey, this is Writers Row. I'm DC Wright-Hammer.
And I'm David Gane, and we have a special guest today.
Hi, I'm Dzintra Sullivan and owner.
If you like what we've been doing on Writers Row, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and questions and comments, make sure to put in the comments down below of this YouTube channel. If you're listening to the podcast, make sure to follow us on Apple, Spotify, or Google for the latest content.
What are we talking about this week, DC?
On this episode, I actually tweeted something that I thought was going to be very supportive of the writing community, and it turned out to be very controversial. And so that tweet, I'd like to talk about. I'd like to digest what I was going for and discuss the opposition and respond to the opposition. And so I'll go ahead and read the tweet. We'll put it on the YouTube channel for those who are watching. But basically I said, eaters don't eat for the recipe. Music listeners don't listen for the sheet music. And readers don't read for the grammar or the spelling. However, you need to get those things right enough, but in the end, you need to spend most of your time telling the best story that you can. That's what readers are looking for. They're not reading your books because of how good they are from a grammatical or spelling perspective. They want to read a good story. And they want the grammatical side of it and the spelling side of it to just kind of be there. And so I tweeted that, and there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, I totally agree, but there's a lot of people who thought I was giving writers license to publish anything under the sun. One person said, it's like telling a chef they can, bake a dough ball that's not completely finished and just give it to anybody. And so I wanted to spend this episode talking about what I meant by the tweet and talking about the response to the tweet and just clarifying the points and taking it to the logical conclusions in all directions. And I think we brought Dzintra on. She responded to the tweet. She had a particular perspective. I think the question to drive discussion in this particular episode is how do we balance making sure we follow writing rules with building a great story? And so I want to open it to Z. What do you think? What is the right balance there of making sure that you adhere to grammatical and spelling rules while writing a great story?
Okay, well, to me, it depends on what you're doing first. Personally, on my level, I write the story first. I go back and make it pretty later. So I can't do both at the same time. My main concern when I'm writing first drafts is getting a well-developed, excellent, mind-gripping story out. I absolutely agree with making it pretty. Grammar has to be obeyed, punctuation has to be obeyed, but it's irrelevant if you don't have a good story. I think on one of my tweets I wrote down that I've never seen a review that said, story sucked, punctuation brilliant, 5 stars.
Okay. So then my first question is going to be, okay, so I agree with the idea that, actually, I don't even know what I think about this. I really don't. Because I'm going to start here. This is the only way I know how to start it, is there are some stories that I don't think are about story, that are written, well received. They may not have a huge readership, but they are looked upon critically, favorably. And so I don't know if that can be across the board. And when I was reading your tweet originally, DC, I was always thinking, I always think about, yeah, that can work, but every time you make those kind of choices, whether you have story in it or not, whether you do your like you don't have great grammar or punctuation or whatever, or some of those things slip by or whatever, I think you're always just kind of carving a little bit of your audience possibly away, right? You make choices of who your audience is, what they want, and you kind of write towards that. So I think that, yeah, some people don't care about grammar and spelling and punctuation, but I do think that there is a group of writers or readers that do care about that, but that's a different particular type of audience.
Well, and I think in my tweet, it was sort of innocuous, right? It like pumped up people who are struggling with the idea that they have to get punctuation and grammar and spelling correct, like 100% perfect.
Yeah.
With telling their best story. That's kind of the reason why I tweeted what I tweeted. But I conceded in there. I even said, get grammar and spelling right enough. And this is where I think it's contrarians, and I think it's people who are afraid that I'm setting a standard of people who don't have to edit their work. Like it seemed like people kind of clutched their pearls and were scared that I was setting a standard that said nobody has to edit. That's a slippery slope argument, or it's a straw man argument, and I was making neither. I was basically saying that, and if you want to put numbers on it, 75% of your work as a storyteller is to tell a good story. 25% of your work is to make sure it follows the rules of the language in which you're publishing. And for English, we've got well-established rules. For other languages, there's other rules. And so that's why I kind of put it the way I put it. Tell a good story, and that's where your focus should be. Take care of grammar and spelling, and I didn't say English, but for the language you're publishing in, and that's what readers want. Nobody is saying, like, let me find that author who is so good at grammar and spelling. Their stories are okay, but I know I'm going to get a quality, well-written English story or whatever it is. And so that's the point I was making. The point I was making, and I'll even tell you where it came from. I was watching some YouTube videos on music, and it was the band Metallica, which people are familiar with. They were like talking about planning their next song, and they weren't talking about sheet music. They weren't talking about, and then I'm going to go to this note, and I'm going to transition from this to this because it looks good on sheet music. They literally were like making noises. They were saying what the sound of the drums sounds like. They were saying what the sound of the guitar sounds like. They were like just making noises. They sounded like anybody planning anything. And yet this is the cream of the crop when it comes to planning rock music. And this is them in the studio planning it. And so I wanted to empower the average writer with that kind of, you need to know some of the basics. You need to be able to get your point across in the grammar and spelling that is expected. But what's going to set you apart is your ability to tell a story. And that even lends itself to, if you're writing a first draft, tell a great story and then get an editor. Tell a great story and then have beta readers. And so that was the point I was making, and people have taken it to the nth degree, and they think that I'm, sullying Chicago-style, rules and APA-style rules of writing a book. And that was not even close to the point that I was making. But it's the internet, and I put myself out there, and here we are. So I get it.
What's your thoughts, Dzintra?
I have a lot of thoughts. I'm trying to keep them really clean. Okay, totally get the Metallica reference. Now, if you brought that back into because you mentioned about a restaurant, like you don't eat a meal because you like the recipe, you eat a meal because it tastes good. So you look at a restaurant that has, say, Michigan stars. No, the hats. The Michigan hats,
right.
The whatever. Okay, so you've got a chef who has so many hats. Now, he has an idea for a meal. He knows in his head what it's going to taste like. He knows what it's going to feel like on his palate, etc., etc., etc. But he may have, underneath him, another sous chef that's good with sauces, or another sous chef that's good with pastry, or another sous chef that's good with whatever, because he knows what the end product is going to be his, but he knows where he needs help in order to achieve that. So as a writer myself, editing is not my strong point at all. If you spoke to one of my editors who saw my first draft, I'm sure they cry when they get it, because they're just like, oh, what is this? Anyway, so I pay them to make it pretty. I make a good story. I know how it is in my head. It's well developed. And then because I know it's one of my weaknesses, I pay somebody else to do the prettying for me. They never change a word. They never change my stories, because I have beaters and so forth on, as we've talked before, that help me with plot development and any holes or anything else that I find that they find along the way. But when it comes to grammar and that, I pay somebody to do it, because I don't focus on that part when I'm writing the story. I focus on the story. I focus on my end product more. Does that make sense, or do I sound weird now?
No, sounds good. So then, do you think a part of the issue is actually a misinterpretation of the tweet, and thinking that you were talking about early drafts and some people were thinking that you were talking about more finished drafts?
Absolutely. If you want to be considered, if you want to be, rewind that a little bit. If you want to be taken seriously in this industry, you have to produce a proper professional product. I'm not traditionally published. I'm an indie author. If I want to compete against traditionally published books, I have to have a professional cover. I have to produce a professional manuscript. It has to look like a professional book. Simple. So I do those things to make that happen. The tweet I thought was fantastic, which is why I came in on it, because I'm like, but it no way did it give a green flag for people to put up, to publish books that are still in the first draft stage. It's not that way at all. It wasn't that way at all.
Well, and I think that's a misinterpretation. I think that people have conceptions that they've got to meet a certain level of quality before they can publish. They feel like maybe they've been subject to gatekeeping, where like they feel like I can't publish until I do X, Y, Z. And so they carry that mantle that I have to. Go ahead. No. You were saying.
No, I'm interrupting now. Go ahead.
It's all right. That they feel like they've got to meet a certain level of correctness, exactness, perfection before they can hit that publish button. And I think the reality is, even if that were true, there's nothing stopping anybody from publishing anything. We live in a time when Amazon and other sources allow you to hit publish on anything. There's no gatekeepers. And so they feel like they have to be the proxy gatekeepers of, there are independent authors that just publish their first draft. And I can actually speak from experience because I know an independent author who published their first draft, and there was a lot of grammatical and spelling errors in it, and that didn't stop them from being successful. In fact, that person, that particular book has over 500 reviews, and that person has made like $60,000 from that first draft that they published. And so I think that's an extreme, and I'm not necessarily for that particular way of publishing. I think that something lends itself to making sure you get it edited and making sure that it is on par with other professionally edited items that are out there, books that are out there. But we live in, there's nothing that stops people from publishing anything. And so emphasizing in my tweet that I want people to at least have a great story is better than people publishing anything. It's better than, and I even conceded in the tweet. I said that grammar and spelling should be right enough. I said that because I understand that people are going to think that I'm saying, you don't have to worry about editing. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that story is primary. I'm saying that a compelling plot is more important than spending, 30 hours trying to make sure you have 0 spelling errors and 0 grammatical errors. That's what's going to separate you from other authors that are out there. And so, I don't know. It's Twitter, it's social media, and of course people are going to interpret it how they want to. But that's kind of what I meant by it.
I want to actually argue, this is such a weird point, but I feel like with your point, you are saying, I know what I'm going to say is I don't even think that story needs to be that great, because I think if you're gonna say grammar punctuation gets a bit of a pass, then I think you can do that with story as well, because I don't think everyone is going to books just for the story. Some people are going for something else, right? The imagery or whatever is going on in there. I think if you're gonna say you can't gatekeep punctuation, grammar, spelling, then you can't gatekeep story either. That's what I'm gonna say, because you're allowed to. Like you said, if there's no gatekeepers, we can put anything out there, and it doesn't need to be story. I just think that every time you make that choice, whichever way it is, you need to just kind of say, accept the consequences of it. Like, yeah, the one person I know who you're talking about published the book with the first draft, and he was fortunate enough to get success out of it, but that I don't think is going to be the same across the board, across all genres, that sort of thing, right? But I do worry that if we keep allowing that to happen and make them successful, are we lowering our standards as a profession?
What do you think, Dzintra?
I think the beauty of being indie authors is that we can do whatever we want, right?
Okay.
We don't adhere to traditionally published rules. It's an exceptionally brilliant part of the literary world, not diminishing it in any way, shape or form, but we're indie authors. If we want to write a story that's whatever and we want to put out the first draft published, go for it. You want to make your own cover, go for it. You want to make it 30 pages and charge $25 for it, go for it. That's the freedom that the indie author or the indie industry gives us. The success that we build off it, or the success that we can gain from it, I think is the ripples of what we produce. I hold, when I said that I produce an equivalent to a traditionally published book, that's my personal standard that I adhere myself to. I don't put that on anybody else. That's just how I want my books to be held. If somebody else wants to put it out with just themselves editing, and there are some awesome self-editors out there, if they want to make their own covers, that's fantastic. It's the way the industry is. It's a freedom of creativity, and I wouldn't ever want to place a censorship on it.
No, absolutely not.
Well, and I think the biggest thing that I wanted to do with the tweet is empower fledgling authors to reduce their standard of perfection. They don't have to be perfect with grammar and spelling. If they have a great...
There's no perfection. I can have 3 editors go through, and I've had 3 editors go through my book, maybe half a dozen beta readers, another 3 or 4 proofreaders, and I will still have a reader come up and go, oh, there's an error on page 53, line 5. And you're like, what?
My book, the first book I ever published, it has 125,000 words in it, and there are at least 33 errors of some kind in it. That means that there is at least 1 error in every chapter. And I say that...
people to find the errors and make it a prize for paperback or something.
Basically, like if you find all the errors in my first book, you get a refund. I don't know. But the point is that I worked exceptionally hard, and I had an editor and a proofreader look at that book, and it wasn't perfect. And I think that's the problem that I have with the stance of you have to, if there's more than 1 error, if there's, 2, 3 errors, 4 errors, I think at a certain, there is a threshold there, but if the story is compelling, you can overcome a lot of that. And I think the example I give from professional authors, Cormac McCarthy, if you've read, I've read The Road all the way through. I've read part of, Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. And it's become clear to me that there's not a comma that he doesn't like. Like, he doesn't use grammar. He doesn't divide his sentences. He'll have a page that is a whole idea in one. And he's heralded as one of the best authors ever in the U.S., contemporary U.S. authors. And I think The Road is brilliant. But even in The Road, and even in some of the other works that I've read from him, he doesn't break up his ideas. He doesn't follow grammatical rules. And so the problem I have with that is that we're saying that prose, we're saying people who are experienced can just do whatever they want. But if you are new, if you're establishing yourself, you have to follow this really tight, concise set of rules. And if you don't, you have no chance of succeeding. And that's the problem I have with it. You set two levels of success for authors, and that really sets something that's there's inequality between someone breaking into the scene and someone who's been there who gets the benefit of the doubt.
I think but you're kind of ignoring intention with that. I think there's specific reasons for those things. So,
well, let's talk about that. Go on. Have you read Cormac McCarthy?
Long time ago. But yeah, no, and I don't have anything to go on. I just know that I'm pretty sure that there is intention behind why he chose that, versus someone who very well may not be having any intention behind their choices. So they just don't have the knowledge, right? So
I also think in order to be allowed that kind of freedom within your work, they would have I don't know the author, so I am just going to shoot in the dark here, but I would suggest that they've probably earned their stripes for that freedom, that they have already learnt the conformity, they've already learnt all the rules, they've already been made to produce works that we, or as the fledglings, have to achieve. And now they've already established their name, they've already established a following, they've already established where they want to be, their niche within the writing industry, and then they can develop their freedom to interpret it the way they want to be.
Yeah, because
chefs don't come out straight out of the bat. They're all, peeling potatoes and onions right off the start like everybody else before they work their way up.
Yeah. The other question I was going to ask was, or a statement I wanted to see what you guys thought about was, if a person writes a good, actually I'm not going to say writes a good story. I'm going to say that they're loose on all their areas, right? Story, grammar, punctuation, whatever. And they decide that they want to release it. They put it out in the world, and it doesn't measure, or it doesn't receive the measurement of success that they've set for themselves. They put it out and they're like, why didn't it sell? And when you look at the reviews, it's, as soon as I started reading, there was a spelling mistake on the first page. Do you think that they should be allowed a pass? Do you think that it's kind of don't have? I don't know. I guess my question is, if they want these things, then do they have to set themselves a higher standard for the next one and keep developing and growing?
In my opinion?
Yeah.
It's just my opinion, absolutely.
I think that, yeah. It's interesting because if they start their book compellingly and they don't have grammatical errors or spelling errors in the first 3 chapters, let's say, and they hook their readers, they sort of get a pass. Whereas if they have the same exact number of errors as somebody else, as long as it's not in the beginning of the book, they, like I said, they sort of get pushed along, and people don't notice it because they're already in the story. They're already believing in the characters, and they're already invested in the story. So I think the beginning of the story is very important, and I think that you can overcome a lot of issues that you have by getting that right. But I still don't want to be a gatekeeper for people who have good stories. I just don't want to be the gatekeeper for that, because the best story that I read last year was written in English by a non-native English speaker. And there was a lot of grammatical errors, I suppose, and a lot of questionable spelling issues. And it didn't take away from the story. So I'm not saying that someone should publish anything, but at the same time, I'm saying if someone has a good story to tell, they should tell it. And they shouldn't worry about all these gatekeeping rules and people who are going to judge them to tell a great story.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying that they shouldn't tell their story. I'm just saying, I guess, more their expectations or of the results. If they get it and no one likes it, then, you know, do they have the right to complain about it? Is, I guess, my question. Everyone's allowed to complain. I'll say that, but
It's
like,
funny
if you want to, you
mentioned
can.
the beginning of a book having to be powerful, though, because there's a lot, when my first book, Arcadia, came out, there was a number of reviews, and it did really well. Okay, it hit #1 in 24 hours, did a really good book, you know, but I did have a number of people that came to me and said if I'd stopped reading within the first 3 chapters, I would have missed out on the best story that I've read, because those first 3 chapters were really slow. And I've gone, oh, okay. So when I wrote book 2, I made sure that, you know, I sort of picked up the pace a bit and developed those first parts of the story in order to learn my craft. If you looked at my book #1 to my book number 15 or number 16 that I'm writing right now, they are so different. There's none of us that come out and go, we're brilliant, first book, let's go, that's the best I'm ever going to write. Your last book is the best book you should ever be writing.
Right.
Or your next book will be the best book that you ever write. We are forever learning, forever developing. And that goes for grammar as well as story development, character development, plot progression, the whole works. We learn as we go every single book.
I feel like you're trying to set something up here.
I think we should probably wrap up the episode at that point.
Yeah.
And so, that being said, Dzintra, what would you like to promote in this episode of Writer's Row?
What would I like to promote? I don't know. What would you like to promote? Nothing really. Oh, well, buy my books. There you go. There. Buy my boner.
Yeah.
Go find my boner book.
Which one is that?
Everybody needs to find a boner. He's pinned to my page, Once Upon a Death. I'm
Okay,
writing
but
number 2 at the moment.
out of like your however many books you've written now, which number was he?
He was number 14.
Always remember your number 14th, right?
He's a special boy. He's not a big talker, but he's a good cuddler.
Is he? I do have to ask, did he come before or after the book?
As in the boner man?
Yeah.
After.
Okay. DC, how about you? What do you want to promote?
I'm just going to promote the channel and the podcast of Writer's Row. We're trying to, provide discussion and help to people who are in the writing community on Twitter and just writers in general. So make sure to subscribe to the channel and make sure to follow us on your favorite podcast outlet, including Google, Apple, and Spotify.
Cool.
What about you, David?
I'm going to continue to promote kunyosandgain.com and our newsletter because that's the best thing, because although I don't write as fast as Dzintra, we do hopefully have a book coming up soon. I have too many things on my plate right now.
I've got a deadline.
Right?
Oh, it's killing me.
What? Set a deadline?
I
that-
have a deadline.
Oh, so do I,
Finish my-
and it just keeps getting pushed.
I don't have a deadline, but I wish I did. So there you go.
Deadlines are awesome.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much for
Thank you guys.
coming on the show.
Thank you, and we'll catch you all next time. Take care. Bye.
Bye.